to come in here and do their worst. And I'm sure that the British health service is the only, as I understand, truly socialized health service in the developed world. And there's so much money there for them to be made, so much money. And all that money is going to come out of our government, our taxes, trading in these very high prices. It's tragic. It really is. And people are going to be the losers. I mean, if you look at where America is now, you've got people who are losing their jobs. I think last I heard 15 million people had lost their job during the pandemic. And when you lose your job, you lose your health insurance and you have no access to medical care.
Yeah.
And they're having the worst pandemic in the world.
And I imagine those things are related. I mean, part of the reason why they're having such a bad pandemic is because obviously they don't have the same amount of coherence and they don't have the same influence or presence of the healthcare service in the United States. A lot of people can't access it. A lot of people go to work. I mean, one of the things here is that we have the furlough scheme, which I now understand has been extended to May, I think someone said. So it's been extended quite a while now. In America, I believe there's no such scheme, is there? So they got the check.
$1,200 back at, I don't know, remember when it was. And now they've just passed a bill, which is $892 billion, which Trump has not yet approved. But it's giving Americans a means-tested one-time check of $600. And I mean, this would be funny if it weren't so tragic. But they're also at the same time advising people without jobs who can't pay their rent, have all these bills, right, because they haven't had a job. And they're saying you should use this money wisely to pay down high interest debt and save for your retirement. $600, that's like what, 400 pounds?
Yeah.
That's what you have to do, pay down your debt and save for your retirement. I mean, are they mental?
It's crazy. And I mean, it does, in those circumstances, of course, people aren't allowed to choose not to go to work. So, for example, if they have health benefits here, they tell people, don't go to work. They do have schemes to support people who then don't go to work if they're sick. I mean, I've heard lots of stories of people who work in the cleaning sector and stuff that they're still pressured to go to work because of certain contractual details. So it's not universal for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's better, certainly, than the United States. But do you think that, so the way the country's going, do you think that that's the society we have to look forward to? But or don't you think that we will be able to nonetheless retain the culture that we've developed anyway since the Second World War, 1945?
Well, I think that there has always been something special, I don't mean that in a good way, from my point of view, about Britain. And it's kind of, if you go back to the 1980s and you think about the Reagan and Thatcher sort of revolutions, that's sort of where it all began. And then the left parties then became right parties under Bill Clinton and Tony Blair because everything was pulled to the right. Now that's well after the Second World War and the settlement and the health service and all that. I think since that time, Britain has been sort of between, I mean, we never lost the health service because it became so important to the middle classes, to everybody. People appreciate it so much. And I mean, it is true that most European countries have an insurance scheme, not like the American ones, but they pay in. We don't, and that's quite special, and that does come from the Second World War, from 1948. But because of Thatcherism and the sort of neoliberalism that came in, we are different from European countries, from the continent, and we have been at least since then. And so I would say that there is a kind of influence of the kind of social welfare system that exists in most of, certainly Western Europe during the before 1989.
And Eastern, I should just say. I mean, obviously,
well, Eastern was
under communism,
under a different
they had
system, yes. But I'm saying even the countries that were capitalist,
yes.
there was a social welfare system that was very good. I mean, yes, you could say now the EU is neoliberal, but that's another story. I mean, that's something else. But it is true that there's been a kind of an ethos of social welfare in Europe that hasn't existed in the United States, I would say, ever. And Britain is kind of somewhere in between that. It's influenced by the continent, and it's also influenced by its own past. Yes, it has been influenced by the post-Second World War settlement. However, it's also been massively influenced by Thatcherism. And so it's very hard to say which way it'll go. Under a Labour government, even a Blairite government, I mean, there might be some breaks on that. It's certainly not going to be Jeremy Corbyn style, but there might be some consciousness of social welfare still. I think under a Tory government, particularly one like Boris Johnson's government, which is really radical like Thatcherism and not a one-nation Tory. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher was not a one-nation Tory, which I think is probably the natural political attitude of this country, one-nation Toryism. I don't think this is a very left-wing country overall. I think even before. But that's my opinion. That's my evaluation of it. But I think, yes, I think under a radical government like Johnson's, the Brexit, the high-level donors, these kind of bunch of schoolboys who are running the country, who are all, mainly very wealthy and don't really have to worry about it and totally out of touch with how people live and really never cared because, they went to Eton or something. They're just out of touch with reality, and they think of themselves, and they think everyone's like their rich friends. I read a thing was interesting. They said because of the momentum, because it was like this kind of organization that was set up by Labour as it's a kind of a left wing, more left than the sort of Blairite wing of the Labour Party. And I don't know if this is true or not, but it's funny. They said that the Tory party thought they might set up a wing that was to the right of the Tory party, but they stopped. They didn't go through with it because one of the policies that they came up with was sort of exterminating the poor.
Yeah, I mean, that's the end game. I read that
somewhere. I mean, that could have been a joke. But I mean, you understand where that kind of thing comes from, because with the government you see now, in spite of the fact that there is a furlough scheme, I think that goes back to attitudes that people have where you say you just can't let people starve. That's not the way we are. Whereas in America, you very much can let people starve to death and die on the streets without a home. This country, I could see if this type of government under Brexit lasted long enough that somehow we could become hardened to that attitude as well. I don't see that as being impossible.
Certainly not. Nothing's impossible, yeah.
So that's a worry.
Do you, I was going to ask, one of the it's on the same theme, but not exactly. One of the things that worries me is, of course, the supply lines coming from, well, I guess now they say the border to France is closed or it's going to open again soon. Do you worry that there won't be enough food and supplies to support us in Britain if there is a no-deal Brexit, for example?
No.
Okay.
I don't worry about that because, I mean, it is possible that we won't be getting strawberries in January. However, I do think that maybe it's possible that, it's a very new thing, in fact, in Britain to have all these summer fruits in the middle of winter. I don't think it would be a terrible thing for us to going back to eating apples and pears or whatever, or things that are are able to be sort of grown locally or more of a winter crop. Mm-hmm. Things like these kind of, like we won't have as much citrus, so we might not have as much broccoli. I think we can survive that for a while. I don't think that's a big problem. I do think that the supermarkets probably have been, again, this is like the same thing as saying, well, this disaster that happened over Christmas might give Boris Johnson pause in thinking about a no-deal Brexit. At the same time, it is probably good that we've been preparing for a no-deal Brexit because the supermarkets and the businesses have actually done so. So it kind of works both ways. I do think that what we see now, though, is a premonition of what would happen as soon as we had the no-deal Brexit. because
Yeah.
these things, they were preparing for this for a reason.
Hmm.
Now, the thing that does worry me is that Britain might become cut off in the sense that hauliers in Europe might just decide, you know what, it's not worth it. How much money are we making by going into Britain? Why should we do it?
Yeah.
You know, if our drivers are going to sit there and they're going to have to dump the fresh stuff, like all this seafood that's come from Scotland now, that's never going to make it to the continent for
Oh,
Christmas.
right. Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
So
that makes
all
sense.
the
Yeah.
fresh produce is going to have to be dumped. And these guys have to now wait to get their, somehow they have to wait to take their empty containers back and fill them up again. It's very complicated. This
Seems that
trucking
way.
across the channel has never been simple, apparently. And there's one other thing. The vaccines come across the channel as well,
Okay.
in vans, and they have to be at 80 degrees below zero when
That's
they're
very cool.
stored. You know, even bringing these across and warming them up to the point where they can actually inject this liquid into your arm, it takes a long time. And another thing is we may not be getting those vaccine supplies.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's so much to think about that what I'm hoping is, and a lot of people say he's not serious, they're doing this to the last minute, he's going to have a deal, he just wants it, you know, maybe. I mean, so they've done so many stupid things already that if, you know, you'd like to think that there really is going to be a deal and things will at least run smoothly across the channel, but I mean, you know, you're not dealing with a normal politician when you're dealing with Boris Johnson. You're dealing with someone who wants to win, but doesn't actually want to govern.
Yeah, it does seem that way. He certainly looks always very overwhelmed. But well, that's just the way they picture him. I guess it's the hairstyle he has. He always looks. But I mean, yeah, it is crazy when I think about the logistics. I mean, that I always worry about. Something I was saying to someone recently was that I feel, and maybe this isn't true, just a fantasy, that in the Second World War, when obviously the supply lines were incredibly strained, I doubt there was probably any import or export from the continent of Europe. But I feel like the population at that time was of a size that perhaps you could sustain a population with just the things you grew in the United Kingdom or maybe Ireland. But now I worry, you know, if there was real hardship at any particular time, and we have a population of millions of people, they did it in the past too, but now even more. You can envisage a scenario where the hardship would be great because the logistics, as you said, are unbelievably complicated. I mean, not complicated, but also extreme in their quantity. I mean, I couldn't believe when they said how many millions of trucks need to pass, not obviously daily, but and you think, wow, that much is going on through the. It's amazing. And I also think of the environmental consequences. I mean, every truck obviously consuming fuel, and it's amazing. But yeah, I worry. I mean, is that something you would ever consider to be risky? I mean, if there were a real thing where we couldn't, I mean, I guess we can always get things from other places too, but it seems like this border with France is a big interchange point. I don't know, it's very worrying, I find.
Yes, it's a huge interchange point, and the French are not feeling very charitable toward us at the moment. No one in Europe is. I mean, they're all laughing at this, and I can understand why. A little bit of schadenfreude there, and I mean, I don't blame them, to be honest. And then there's this fish thing. I mean, the fishing thing. I mean, the French, I guess partly the Netherlands and Belgium, they're all very concerned about being able to continue fishing. And I mean, I don't see how much we're losing by allowing that. It's been going on for years. I mean, why are the fishing stocks such a big sticking point in this? And I guess we just don't know really what's going on. I mean, we get to hear what we're told, and you know, none of us is there at the negotiations. And I just hope that, you know, what is it now? We have like 7 days or something. I mean,
Not long.
I just hope that by the time this is over, we're going to have some sort of a deal, not just for the sake of trucking or for the sake of the supply chains and that, just because we don't want to be at odds with our neighbors. It's absurd. There's no reason for it.
Yeah, but we want the best deal. We don't want to show our hand or get a crappy deal.
But even as an independent country, independent countries still have relations with other countries. It doesn't mean you've lost control because you're not telling all your neighbors to go suck. I mean, you know, every country has to have relations with other countries. And I don't understand why this is so difficult. You think it would be easier now that we're so independent.
I guess it's